So when you're trying to make sense of your spouse's behavior, it would be good to think in terms that behavior serves a purpose, or the other person is actually trying to achieve a particular goal with words or behavior. Words are just another form of behavior. So when I say behavior, I'm talking about what your spouse does and also what he or she says. So people don't behave for just any random reason. They behave because they're trying to achieve a particular end result. And if you're arguing with your spouse a lot, then the end result is usually dysfunctional, but it still is a result that your spouse is shooting for nonetheless. Now, the reason it's important to look for purpose or motivation behind the behavior, twofold. First of all, it will help you take that behavior less personally, because it is very rarely the case that the other person is behaving in a particular way with the specific end goal in mind to harm. Okay, malicious intent is very rarely, if ever, the goal. Now, I'm not saying the behavior doesn't hurt. It still hurts. It's not acceptable. And just because there was no malicious intent doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. But it's easier to take it less personally when you realize the goal was not to intentionally harm, but it was to achieve a different goal. So that's the first reason you want to look for purpose. The second reason is, if you can find the purpose behind the behavior, then you and your spouse can come up with a more functional way to achieve that same end goal. So, for example, if the autistic spouse is having a version of a meltdown, then the goal is not malicious intent. That's the last thing that's on his mind. The goal is to discharge negative pent-up anxiety. Anxiety is a form of energy. It's very uncomfortable. It short-circuits cognitive abilities, and it makes him look like he's having an adult temper tantrum. If the adult spouse is having a version of a shutdown, the end goal is not to reject or abandon his NT wife. The end goal is, yet again, to get away from what he perceives to be a source of anxiety so that he can calm down, and that looks like he just doesn't care about the relationship and is always unwilling to discuss problems. If the NT wife seems to be registering a bunch of complaints and seems to be very parental and points out a bunch of flaws in her husband, again, the end goal is not to shame him or guilt trip him or demean him. In this case, the end goal is to resolve some of the relationship difficulties that she perceives. So what it looks like to him is she's being critical, but the purpose behind that behavior for her is to resolve relationship problems. So when you're on the receiving end of certain behavior or words that are unwanted and even hurtful, it's just the smart thing to do to, instead of going, okay, well, they just meant to hurt me. This was purposely designed for revenge purposes. Instead of going down that rabbit hole, which you have done thousands of times now, it's critically important to pause, look at the situation rationally after you've calmed it down before responding to it, and examine with your spouse preferably, but you can do this on your own. Do a little bit of an investigation and hypothesize regarding what might be the real purpose driving this particular behavior. So it'll save you a bunch of heartache if you will understand that people behave in a particular way because they have an end goal in mind. It's not random. It's very rarely the case that their intention is to harm. They behave and say certain things because they feel they're doing the right thing in the moment for themselves. And of course, in many cases, as you have experienced, the thing that they think they're doing right in order to help themselves often has the end result of offending the other party in some shape, form, or fashion. So that is true. But offending the other person is not the end goal. We have to find out what was the original motivation, and then we can do an investigation to see how can this person achieve that same end goal in a more functional way that doesn't result in the other party being offended or harmed in some way. So in this way, you're not looking for excuses for the hurtful behavior. You're looking for the reason behind that behavior so that that particular end goal can be reached using more appropriate words and behavior. As an exercise, so that you can actually get something from this video, I would like for you to list 3 behaviors, problematic behaviors in your opinion, that your spouse exhibits, something that he or she says or does that seems to be repeatedly hurtful in some shape, form, or fashion, and either by yourself or with your spouse, come up with some reasonable end goals, the real end goals, that he or she might be trying to achieve with the supposed hurtful behavior. That's the first part of the exercise. The second part then would be to, in concert with your spouse, try to come up with some other methods where this goal can still be achieved, but using different words and behaviors. And that is always the case. There's more than one pathway to every end result. This very video has purpose with an end goal in mind, and that is for the two of you in the neurodiverse marriage to A, not take one another's behavior so personally and as a direct attack, and B, for the two of you to begin the process of investigating what the true end goal is and how that might be achieved with better methods.